Francis. Thank you for joining us today on the stage. So, as Simeon just mentioned, like Higala is one of Mojaloop adopters, and actually, you kind of have a funny story within the community because you looked at everything yourself. You downloaded you went to Mojaloop GitHub on your own as well, and then one day you came to us and said, "Oh, by the way, we are using Mojaloop." So perhaps, like, could you please introduce yourself and what Higala does a bit more?
Sure. No, thanks, Julie, and thanks everybody for having me and the opportunity to share what we're doing in the Philippines. It's my first time in Kigali, so I'm really excited and also really looking forward to meeting many of you. So a little bit about Higala and myself. So I'm Francis Plaza. I'm the CTO of Higala. Higala came about a year ago, but the beginnings of it was really even before we thought of building together the project, which turned out to be the company. So I'm a software engineer by training. I've been building software products for many years, but about 5-6 years ago, I started one of the fastest growing payments companies in the Philippines, and this was before Higala. And we ended up being invested by folks like Peter Thiel, YC, and Stripe. And one of the biggest realization we had when we were building that company was that it was just really painful to start a fintech, let alone a payments company in the Philippines. And coming out of that experience, one of the co-founders of Higala, we had an interesting conversation about how can we make a platform where anybody, whether that's a small business, a small rural bank, or any entrepreneur who thinks of a new idea, how can we join the financial ecosystem? And we realized it was really, really still difficult, even in the year 2022 at that time. So we ended up brainstorming about Higala, found Mojaloop, and then we sort of just tried it out. And I guess the rest is history.
I guess this is interesting because if we think of the Philippines, and it's true in many countries in Southeast Asia, right? There is already an instant payment system in place, which is kind of efficient and so on, right? So why come up with this proposition on this own and not work with the existing incumbents?
Yeah, so there's been an existing instant payment, but actually, like, instant payments didn't come about to the Philippines until about 2018. But the full implementation of it, we didn't feel it until about 2020, where the pandemic really forced everybody to use digital payments. I remember, again, before Higala, when we were starting the payments company, I remember the way we would remit money to our merchants was actually like manual. Every day, I have my EA print a report of how much we owe each merchant, and she would fall in line in the bank and deposit money. That's how we would hack the feeling of instant payments at that time. And fast forward 2-3 years later, the real interesting question that we ask ourselves was that there is an existing instant payment system, but the adoption still could do a lot better. And why another question we ask is, why are not a lot of people actually adopting it? And there have been a lot of work done on that. Many private companies and startups have been trying to bridge the gap. But really, at the core, the reason we started a payments company was that it was inefficient in the first place. So when Winston and I basically sat down, asked ourselves, why don't we actually build something that solves the core problem of it, where it's really hard to get on board the existing financial infrastructure. And that's why we decided to actually go ahead and build an alternative, and we believe a better option for many.
In fact, like, how many rural banks on Instapay today? Like, there is only 2 or 3, right? How many rural banks are member of participant of Instapay today? Like, not a lot, right?
Member of Instapay rural banks. So it's interesting because when we say rural banks, they're not actually all the same. We have like giant rural banks where they're so comfortable where they are to be called rural banks. They don't even bother like upgrading their category because I guess there's some compliance issues around it, but they act like big banks. So most of those guys who have the financial capacity to be part of the instant payment. They are, although they're rural banks, but the real, well, sort of the small banks, right? And these are really small, one branch, two branch, serving farmers and underserved communities. They just can't. Like, even if they wanted to, there's no existing solution.
And what type of use cases are you looking to implement?
Yeah. So at the very onset, the initial use cases, of course, that we're looking right now is first is we want to solve the accessibility problem for DFSPs. So the one of the biggest problems we realized when we were talking to many of these small rural banks was that they don't necessarily have, even if they have the resources financially, they don't necessarily have the technical capabilities to implement, and with very limited resources, it was difficult for them to even explore joining an instant payment system, whether that's InstaPay or any other alternative. So that's one. uh, I think for us, and in my experience building a payment, a fintech platform, it is really important for any provider to make the barrier to entry low. So, getting on board is an important prerequisite, right? So that's one, like we're solving that from a UI UX perspective. How do we make integration easy? How do we make onboarding quick? And we're trying to build more software automation and basically dumbing it down, right? APIs that are quick and easy to integrate. So that's one. On the payments use cases, we want to focus, of course, on the personal transfers, P2P first. There's a huge gap still in the Philippines where majority of personal P2P transfers are done with one e-wallet provider, which is GCash. They participate in instant payments, but the reality is 95% of that instant payments just live within their platform. So, that creates a lot of risk also when your entire country is run by one, de facto instant payment provider, which is a private company. So, we want to be able to democratize that. And I think from there, it really serves as a springboard for more use cases, merchant payments, adopt the national QR standard, and I guess from there it becomes more easy for us to implement more use cases.
Yeah, and perhaps a bit of context as well, because we're in Africa, and one thing that is slightly different in Asia is there is a lot of QR code payment, merchant payment, and so on. So usually you go to a shop, you will actually flash a QR code to pay for food and so on, right? So that's why like the concept of actually QR code interoperability is quite key. Where are you on your journey?
So interestingly enough, when I was on my way here to Rwanda, our CEO Vice sent me a message that the central bank actually just launched or made public the draft for a regulation that makes it competitive for many participants to become an alternative switch, and not on a national level, because for the longest time it was mandated that there has to be only one. So I guess on the question of where we are in that journey, we're excited because we've been working with the regulators to make this happen on a national level. So the impact will definitely be huge. And we actually entered into a pilot phase with the central bank to work with uh, different financial institutions, both small rural banks as well as the big banks, because we need them to make this to make this actually work. So we are in a pilot phase. We have signed up, I believe, about 6 rural banks of all different sizes. We have one big e-wallet provider who actually would want to sign next week, and one that we launched during the Singapore FinTech Festival, a partnership with one of the top 5 big banks in the Philippines. So that's what we have lined up, but definitely there's still a lot of work to do.
And I have a specific question as well, like because earlier we heard that like some projects are about to enter regulatory sandbox as well, right? Obviously, like depending on the jurisdiction, the process is always slightly different. But would you have 1 or 2 insights to share with them regarding this, and something we should know before starting the process?
Well, I guess one thing we wish we had known before starting with the process was we knew it was going to be difficult working with existing legacy players, not just from a technology perspective, but just everything that comes with it, right? From regulatory to, how do you position yourself in the market without threatening the big players? Because the reality with I guess fintech and building financial companies is at the end of the day you really have to work together with many existing players. And while we knew it was going to be difficult, we didn't realize it was going to be really really difficult. And it takes a lot of I guess for us when we started this, even just as an idea, we actually went immediately to the regulator and created a cadence with them. And we were lucky enough, and I guess it varies depending from jurisdiction, but we were lucky enough that our central bank, at least among ASEAN regulators, is one of the most progressive and open when it comes to actually working with us and also learning from us and how to draft policies that would actually, make all these new technologies and new solutions possible. So I guess we wish we knew how hard it's going to be, but I guess as a hacky startup, we were able to actually work around some of those difficulties and challenges.
Okay, thank you. Um, Again, like because we were not here at the beginning of your journey, right? You started using Mojaloop a bit on your own. So can you tell us about like more about how you decided to leverage Mojaloop and like what were the key variables that like, help you to make this decision?
Yeah. So how we I guess how we got into this journey when we were thinking about uh, building the platform from scratch, we definitely had a lot of different options. For one, our team has had extensive experience building financial services, both as our own or actually delivering for other financial institutions. So there was definitely an option to build everything possibly from scratch. And then I remember there was a time when one of the co-founders, Winston, mentioned about Mojaloop to the team. In one of the, I guess for us, not only was Mojaloop or is Mojaloop open source, but also aligns to the core vision of what we wanted to do, basically making financial services not just affordable, but largely accessible to many players. And being part of the community, we believe that could help us pave the way, not just in our market, but maybe who knows, right? Some of the learnings that we get from the Philippine setting, we could definitely contribute back. And I guess the more learnings we put together as a community, we're better off together rather than just as one. So that's sort of was one, I would say the biggest consideration for us. And cost is even like probably at the bottom of the consideration where, but of course affordability is one, but for us, just being part of the community and being able to learn from many of you guys will definitely make our implementation better over time.
And I guess I feel it each time we work together, right? Like because this guy first question is always like when we design solution on the whiteboard, it's like always, always, always. How can we contribute back? Like, are we able to contribute this back? So why do you? It's such a like drive for you to contribute back. Perhaps like could you share a bit more on the reason why each time like you feel it's almost a prerogative?
Yeah. Interestingly, one thing I learned, I guess, in fintech overall is that, as the tide rises, everybody sort of floats, right? And even before Higala, when we were doing our payments company, it was interesting because we were working with a lot of our competitors. We were working on how to make, how to push for regulation. We were working on some of the standards. How do we make things interoperable? Because at the end of the day, you cannot really like cover everything. I think it's in a similar vein that contributing back to the community to Mojaloop will definitely just lift all boats. And I guess having that mantra, we'd rather, I guess, when we were thinking about, in our market, right, we also even work with the biggest instant payment platform provider. Our mantra really is that, we'd rather grow the pie bigger rather than own the whole portion of a small pie. And I think it's the same vein that contributing back just helps everybody, and definitely will make our own implementation even better.
Thank you. Another question I have is around when you started to work on Mojaloop, and we have people in the room that are at the beginning of this journey, right? Considering whether or not they want to leverage Mojaloop. So let's travel back in time and think of yourself the first time you saw Mojaloop and you started working on the platform. Um, could you share some insight of some of the things that again, you wish you knew, or how you would approaching differently now that you have more experience of the platform? So some tips to basically the new potential adopter of the platform.
Yeah. So I guess to preface this, when I officially joined Higala's engineering team, the team has done already quite an extensive work prior to this. So I guess for me personally, I sort of came in with the team already exerting a lot of effort. And I guess that made somewhat like my own job a lot easier when I joined the engineering team of Higala. But I guess one of the main insights from the team, we were working on this, and this was when we were just toying. I don't think at that time we have reached out to you guys, but I think the learning curve definitely for us was a lot steeper than initially expected, and I suppose coming from someone who has tried to build APIs also for other developers to consume. For us, it has always been a mantra of how do we make integration time a lot quicker and a lot faster, because that saves time and money. And I guess what we would wish at that time, right? And it probably also is a function of just being familiar with the platform and what have you. But I'm sure for beginners, definitely um, I guess a way for things for them to learn the platform a lot faster, right? And it could be in many different better educational materials and what have you, or things like that. And yeah, I mean, for us, we spent probably about I think 8 sprints, which is equivalent for 2 months for us, right? So yeah, I guess that's sort of going back in time. That's probably what the team would wish for us when we were just starting.
Okay, so I guess another shout out to the accelerator programs that you didn't follow, right?
Yeah.
Because you didn't know about this. But yeah, thank you for this. And I guess thinking of the future and where you are in this journey, right? You are usually contributing to many work streams as well. So what type of features, or new features, you would like us to work on the module platform?
I think one of the things that the team would love to explore and that we were discussing is definitely around, there are different considerations to this, and we were thinking about fraud and risk, and sans Mojaloop also the question around what's a switch role to play in the scheme, and how does it play, especially when it comes to working with multiple financial services providers, like where does fraud and risk sit in the platform and all that. um, I think for us, we would love to explore how we could implement that in a fashion where, we don't create a platform that sort of rejects the 99% good actors, but in fact, make it easy for many DFSPs to integrate fraud and risk into their system, while basically opening up the entire financial network and grow the transactions. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive. So I guess for us, it's a working thing in our minds. And I don't know, maybe to answer your question, we would love to sort of explore that and explore how well we could implement that into our implementation.
And I guess as well, a bit for context, scam is a big topic in Southeast Asia and in the Philippines as well, right? So yeah, I think making sure that we're creating instant payment, but at the same time, not super highway for fraudulent payment is key, right? So perhaps could you share a bit more around your thoughts around this?
Um, my thoughts are so. I guess I'll share. I guess now looking back, it's a funny anecdote. So just last weekend, our biggest e-wallet provider was hit with some. It wasn't necessarily a scam, but this really affects trust in the ecosystem. So for some reason, when people woke up on Saturday, they opened their GCash account, their money was wiped out. Like I think like millions of people just saw their GCash having from something to now zero. Right. And it was funny because now, I mean, Filipinos being creative, we have a lot of memes online with a GCash billboard saying "Go cashless with GCash," and people are saying, "Oh, they've done a really great job making us literally cashless," right? And apparently, it wasn't necessarily a scam. It was an error in their reconciliation or whatever system they were using that basically just messed the whole thing up. And that affected everybody's trust in the ecosystem. Whatever technical reason you give them, you send them a text or an email, it really didn't matter to them. Now there was just less trust in the ecosystem. So for me, I think, beyond fraud and risk, but also on the side of it, like education, like how do we build products and technology such that not only would we prevent those potential fraud, like they're always going to be there. That's the reality of life. But how do we make it such that we build not just accessibility, but more importantly, like just trust in the ecosystem. And I think when we put fraud and risk in mind, it definitely would be important how we could implement it in such a way that ultimately what we're trying to build is just we build trust in the entire ecosystem.
Thank you. Conscious of time, I'd like to switch gear a bit and talk a bit more about financial inclusion. There is a lot being done about this in the Philippines. In fact, like it was interesting to see that at the Singapore FinTech Festival that Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, who is special advocate for financial health for the UN, was at the main stage, and she was at the Philippines booth as well, right? And yeah, really mentioning how like the Philippines are an example to follow. So could you explain a bit more like what you're doing in this space specifically and how Mojaloop sits in your strategy?
Yeah, I guess on the note of financial inclusion, I guess a little bit of story before I answer like the question. When we were working and before we started Higala, like we had the chance to work with one of the governors of one of the poorest provinces in the country. And interestingly enough, he had this idea called citizen card, where everyone who basically is a citizen in his province gets a card, and their government subsidy or government help or what we call ayuda will basically be credited into the card, right? And he piloted it to 10% of the population. Everyone seemed excited about it. And then when the subsidies or the ayudas came into their cards, what happened was there was just long lines in the ATM machines all over the province, right? People wanted it out from their cards. And we were interested because, I mean, basically we replaced the old-fashioned system of them lining up getting cash, and we basically just replaced it with an ATM. And one of the key insights that we learned from that experience was there just simply wasn't an ecosystem for them to even use their card. Like they don't care whether it's a MasterCard. All they need is, they want money to be able to pay, to take a public transport or pay in the market, like when for their daily needs and what have you. And the biggest gap in our market, where the internet penetration's relatively good, we have about 75% of the population having access to internet or even like cheap smartphones. But the ecosystem, there's still a big gap in the ecosystem where the ecosystem is basically dominated by big players in rural areas where we're leaving behind a good chunk of the population having limited access to many of the tools. Sure, there's an e-wallet provider like Gcash, but fees are high, moving money is expensive. There are limited merchants in the rural areas, and everybody still loves cash at the end of the day. So for us, what we believe really financial inclusion means isn't just all about affordability, but it's also about accessibility, right? Like how do we make the platform such that, as I mentioned earlier, like anybody, whether you're a small seller in the market or like an entrepreneur or someone anywhere in our country, you should be able to have access to many of these tools cheaply, but also be able to use them really easily. So for us, technology is one, but I think financial inclusion really needs the participation of multiple players in the market, the government, the private sector, and having all the financial service providers work together in as much as they compete with each other. So for us as Higala, that's our aim, to be able to work with many of these players from the government down to the small sellers, and still a long way to go, but hopefully we'll see that within the next few years.
Thank you. And focusing a bit more on cross-border payments, right? Because the Philippines are a huge market when it comes to remittance. You have lots of Filipinos abroad remitting money home. What are your plans in the area of cross-border payments?
Yeah, on cross-border payments, the Philippines is an interesting market because we have like a huge influx of remittances coming to the country. I think the number is about $10 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Tangent to Higala, we're actually working with another company that actually does more purpose-specific remittance, where we work with merchants and providers in country to sort of like receive those remittances and payments at a much more affordable manner. So like, for example, if your family from the US basically pays for your grocery or for your real estate payments or juice for your condo, they could do that much faster and easier. And we're collaborating with a company to sort of have that system trickle down not just to the rural to the urban areas, but bring that to the rural areas. Because right now it's really, if you live in the province, it's expensive to get that remittance, because that remittance have to go through a big bank, which then trickles down until probably to your e-wallet or to your rural bank account, and you're already like you probably already paid at least $20-30 every time you do that. So, and that's significant for many people. So for us, yeah, cross-border is definitely one key aspect, especially in a market where a lot of our overseas Filipino workers just send money on a daily basis practically.
Thank you. I see our time is almost up. Perhaps we can take one question before wrapping up, if there is any. All right. Thank you so much for all your insights today.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thanks, everyone.